The beach villa in Carmel wasn't just a house. It was where I learned to swim, to dream, to believe I was loved back when mom and dad still looked at me the way they looked at my sister. But as we got older, she became the favorite and I became invisible. Years later, they sold that villa behind my back, erased my name from everything, and handed it all to her. What they didn't know was that Grandma had left behind a secret will. And while they tried to bury me, I used it to bury their perfect story instead. I was 8 years old the first time I realized the ocean had a rhythm all its own. Our family's beach villa in Carmel by the sea sat just high enough above the shore to hear the waves without being swallowed by them. That house felt like magic then. Wide porch swings, the smell of sea salt clinging to every window frame, my grandmother's lemon bars cooling on the kitchen counter. Back then, everything felt equal. I had my place in that home just as much as anyone else. My sister Sabrina and I would race up the wooden stairs, barefoot, towels trailing behind us, our hair wet from the surf. She was younger by 3 years, full of energy and unfiltered joy. We'd sleep in bunk beds in the room with the skylight whispering secrets long after we were supposed to be asleep. Our parents, Thomas and Denise, were softer in those days. They laughed more. I remember Dad teaching us how to cast fishing lines off the rocky edge and Mom singing along with the radio while making grilled cheese sandwiches. There wasn't a favorite back then. Or maybe there was, but I couldn't see it. We were just two little girls chasing seagulls and fighting over who got the last piece of brownie. The world was still fair. That started to change around middle school. I was never the loud one. I liked books, painting, organizing my school supplies. I wasn't shy exactly, but I didn't command a room like Sabrina did. She sparkled. Teachers adored her kids, followed her around. Even strangers seemed to light up when she walked into a place. By the time she turned 12, she was already taller than me, prettier too, with thick blonde hair and a smile that turned heads. At first, I didn't notice how the conversations at dinner started revolving around her. Her new friends, her dance recitals, her funny jokes. I tried to speak up sometimes to talk about a book I read or the art project I was working on, but somehow the topic would swing back to her. And it wasn't just at home. Our relatives started bringing her gifts and telling me how lucky I was to have such a talented sister. I didn't resent her. Not then. I just tried harder. I got straight A's, joined the science club, even took piano lessons, though I hated practicing. I thought if I just kept achieving, they'd notice me again. But Sabrina always outshone me without even trying. She didn't need to study for tests and still got top marks. She'd get caught breaking curfew and Mom would laugh it off. When I accidentally knocked over a vase, I got grounded for a week. It was like the balance had shifted, and no one told me. The villa became the backdrop for my slow realization. Summers turned into silent competitions I kept losing. Sabrina got the bigger room. Sabrina got to invite friends. Sabrina got to skip doing chores because she had cheer practice or a headache or just looked too pretty to be bothered. One summer, I remember asking if I could invite my friend Rachel to the villa. Mom said maybe, but then Sabrina asked the same thing the next day, and suddenly we were hosting 5 girls from her dance team. I ended up sleeping on the couch while they took over my room and the upstairs deck. When I tried to join them, they made fun of my swimsuit. I told Mom and she said I was being sensitive, that I needed to learn to get along with people better. The worst part wasn't being ignored, it was being tolerated. Like I was this slightly disappointing placeholder daughter, not quite enough to deserve attention but too present to fully erase. Grandma Margaret was the only one who never treated me differently. She'd sneak me cinnamon rolls early in the morning before the others woke up. She'd ask about my school projects, actually listen. Once I overheard her scolding Dad after he brushed off one of my stories. I don't know what she said exactly, but I remember her voice firm and low and the way he rubbed the back of his neck afterward and mumbled an apology I never got. Over time, I stopped asking for anything. If I needed new shoes, I bought them myself. If I wanted to go somewhere, I figured out the logistics. Meanwhile, Sabrina got a car on her 16th birthday and a designer handbag for prom. They called it encouragement. I called it favoritism, but I never said the word aloud. The villa became hers in every way. Photos of her on the mantle, her dance trophies on the shelf. Even when I came back from college for visits, I felt like a guest. My room had been redecorated into a reading nook complete with floral pillows and a portrait of Sabrina smiling above the fireplace. The house that once smelled like lemon bars and sea breeze now felt like someone else's life. I kept telling myself it didn't matter. I had my own apartment in New York, a career friends who saw me for me. But some part of me still thought of that villa as home. Or maybe I just hoped that one day they'd remember I existed. That's the thing about being the forgotten one. You stop expecting justice. You settle for quiet survival, until someone takes even that from you. I moved to New York the summer I turned 18. I had packed 2 suitcases, a half-used sketchbook, and a laptop that barely worked, but I walked into that dorm room like it was the first space in my life that truly belonged to me. No pastel pillows I hadn't picked, no framed photos of Sabrina smiling down at me from every corner. Just beige walls, shared showers, and a twin bed next to a girl named Courtney who loved loud pop music and drank coffee with oat milk. I didn't mind any of it. I was free. College was hard at first. Everyone seemed to come from some elite prep school or had parents who sent care packages with monogrammed towels and gift cards. I took on 2 part-time jobs. One at the campus library, the other at a sandwich shop down the street. I studied late, slept little, and did everything I could to stay ahead. There was no safety net waiting for me back in California. If I failed, I'd fall alone. My parents didn't offer to help. They said I was the one who chose a school across the country, that if I was grown up enough to leave, I was grown up enough to pay my way. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for anything. I just got to work. Meanwhile, Sabrina stayed in California. She enrolled in a community college nearby but barely went to class. By 20, she had built a following online, posting makeup tutorials and brunch photos. Somehow, every new follower came with a new gift. A trip to Palm Springs. A free teeth whitening kit. A brand deal for swimwear. My mom shared every one of her posts on Facebook with captions like, "So proud of my beautiful girl and future star in the making." When I landed an internship at a PR agency in Manhattan, I emailed my parents to let them know. No response. 3 weeks later, I saw they had flown to San Diego for one of Sabrina's brand events. She was standing on a stage smiling beneath a banner that said, "Beauty that shines from within." I stared at the photo for a long time, wondering what exactly she had within her that made them so devoted. By the time I graduated, I had already been offered a full-time position. I didn't go home that summer. I moved into a studio in Astoria with walls thin enough to hear my neighbors' nightly karaoke but enough space to breathe. I bought a small plant and named it Florence. I ordered takeout on Fridays and watched old black and white movies while doing my laundry. I wasn't lonely, not really. I had friends from work, people who valued my opinion. I was moving up, eventually becoming the youngest account manager at the agency, then a senior associate, and finally a director. My name was on campaigns that won awards. Clients requested me by name. I had carved out something real from nothing. And still, when the holidays rolled around, there was no call, no invitation. Sabrina posted photos of perfectly set tables at the villa, her in matching pajamas with mom and dad. Sometimes Grandma Margaret was in the background, smiling softly, looking smaller each year. I wondered if they made her feel like a guest too. The only person who kept in touch consistently was Grandma. She emailed me every few months short notes with updates like, "The gardenia is blooming early this year," or "I saw a bluebird on the fence and thought of you." I always wrote back. Sometimes I'd send her photos from Central Park or of a new painting I had started and never finished. She never asked why I didn't come home. She never pushed. One year she mailed me a scarf she had knitted. It was deep green and uneven at the edges, with a note that said, "I made this during the rainstorms." I wore it that whole winter, even though it didn't match anything I owned. There were moments when I thought maybe I should try harder. Call Mom. Send Sabrina a message. Reach out and pretend the distance wasn't carved by years of being passed over. But every time I picked up the phone, I remembered all the holidays spent alone, the birthdays that went unacknowledged, the silence after every achievement. Instead, I poured myself into work. I loved the thrill of crisis management, the long nights of strategy meetings, the way I could help brands tell stories that mattered. I stayed late without being asked, mentored new hires, gave talks at networking events. I had something they couldn't take from me. Or so I thought. Then, one afternoon, I opened an email from Bryce Hamilton. He was a realtor back in Monterey County, someone I hadn't spoken to since high school. We'd been in the same English class, once partnered for a project about the Great Gatsby. His message was short. "Hey Mads, not sure if this was a mistake, but your family's villa just went up on a private listing. Thought you'd want to know." Attached was a link to a real estate site. There it was. 5-bedroom ocean view villa in Carmel by the Sea. Listed for just under $2.3 million. Photos of the deck we used to sunbathe on, the kitchen with the blue tile backsplash. I had helped Grandma choose the reading nook where my old bed used to be. There was no mention of me. No sign I had ever lived there. For a long time, I just stared at the screen. My chest felt tight, like I had run a mile without breathing. I clicked through each photo slowly, trying to find something, anything that still felt like mine. But every room had been staged, stripped, wiped clean. They were selling the only place I had ever thought of as home. And no one had even told me. I didn't even know I was dialing her number until I heard it ringing. My hand was shaking, phone pressed too hard against my ear, eyes still fixed on the listing. Mom picked up on the second ring. Her voice was flat, like she'd just come out of a nap. "Hi honey, everything okay?" The question hit harder than I expected. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Is the villa really up for sale?" She paused. I heard the faint sound of a spoon hitting a mug, maybe coffee being stirred. Then she exhaled like I had asked something exhausting. "Yes. We decided it was time, So it's true. You didn't think I should know." Another pause, longer this time. "Madeline, you haven't lived here in years. You made your choice. This has nothing to do with you." I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek. My throat burned. I had prepared myself for excuses, some weak attempt at justification. But this wasn't even that. This was dismissal. Cold and practiced. "I'm part of this family." Her tone didn't change. "You left, sweetie. You moved on. It's not like we thought you'd be interested in anything here. Sabrina's been helping with everything. She's taken care of the maintenance, met with the agents. It's her home now, really." I stood up too fast, my chair scraping the floor behind me. I didn't even say goodbye. I ended the call with my thumb and stared at the screen like it might apologize. The villa was always home. Even when it stopped feeling like one. Even when they started treating me like an afterthought, it was the place that held the parts of me they couldn't touch. My childhood drawings in the attic. The names carved into the wood frame behind the laundry room. Grandma's handwriting on the pantry labels. I thought about Sabrina giving tours to buyers, pointing out the view from the upstairs deck like it was hers to offer. About strangers walking through the rooms, wondering where to put their furniture. That night, I barely slept. I sat on my living room floor, laptop open, searching for anything that might show my name tied to the property. Nothing. The deed was in my parents' names. No mention of a trust, no co-ownership. It was like I had never existed. The next morning, I called Grandma. She picked up with that soft, familiar warmth that never wavered. "Maddie, sweetheart, it's so good to hear your voice." I tried to speak, but my words caught. It wasn't just the betrayal or the shock. It was the way she sounded, happy just to hear from me. Like I still mattered. "Are you okay?" she asked, concern rising in her voice. I'm not." I told her everything. About the listing. About Mom's voice on the phone. About the way it felt like someone had erased me with a single keystroke. She didn't interrupt. Not once. When I finally finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "I think it's time we had a proper talk," she said. "Can you come out here tomorrow?" I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Yes, I can." She told me to meet her at the little cafe near Ocean Avenue, the one with the blue umbrellas and the lemon scones I loved as a kid. I booked a last-minute flight that afternoon. Took time off work. Told my assistant to hold all meetings until further notice. I couldn't stay in New York while they sold off my past like a weekend estate sale. Flying into Monterey felt surreal. The coastline came into view like something out of a memory. Familiar but changed, like it belonged to someone else now. I rented a car and drove the 30 minutes to Carmel, watching every bend in the road for something that would make it feel like home again. Grandma was already sitting at a corner table when I arrived, a cup of tea in front of her, her silver hair tucked neatly behind her ears. She stood when she saw me and wrapped me in a hug that made my chest ache. "You look tired," she said. "I feel tired." We sat. The waitress brought me a coffee without asking. Grandma must have told her. It was still how I liked it. Strong, no sugar. "I don't know how much you know," I began. "Probably more than you think," she said gently. She reached into her bag and pulled out a slim folder. My name was written on the tab in her handwriting. Inside was a stack of documents neatly clipped, aged slightly at the edges. "This is my will. I updated it in 2015. I looked at her confused. "There's a clause about the villa," she continued. "It states clearly that it is not to be sold or transferred without written agreement from both you and Sabrina." I had it reviewed by my attorney, Douglas Klein. Solid as a rock. My heart thudded in my chest. "They never told me about any of this," I whispered. "I know, I had hoped. I suppose I had hoped your father would respect it. But things have changed, haven't they?" I nodded slowly, flipping through the pages. There it was, black and white. My name. My right. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" She looked at me with tired eyes that had seen too many years and too many disappointments. "Because I thought maybe this family could find its way back to each other without needing reminders of what's fair and what isn't." I was wrong. We sat there in silence for a while. Outside, the sky was turning gold, the ocean breeze rolling in through the open window. "You don't have to let this go, Maddie. You have every right to speak up. Every right to fight for what's yours." I folded the folder and slid it into my bag. "I think I will." Grandma didn't say much after that. She just reached across the table and squeezed my hand like she had done when I was little and too scared to sleep alone. The folder with the will sat heavy in my bag, heavier than it should have for something that only weighed a few ounces. But it carried years of silence, of exclusion, of being erased with a smile and a shrug. Before we parted, she handed me a business card. Douglas A. Klein, attorney at law. Carmel, California. I slipped it into my wallet without a word. My hands were trembling by the time I got back to my rental car. I sat there for a few minutes, letting the air conditioning cool my face, trying to decide if I felt more angry or relieved. In the end, it was both. Anger that they'd done it without telling me, without even pretending I mattered. Relief that I wasn't crazy. That I wasn't imagining the injustice. There it was in writing. A legal document that proved I still had a place in this family, even if they had done everything possible to make me feel like I didn't. I drove back to my hotel in silence. The road curved along the coast, the sky melting into that familiar golden haze that always made the sea look like it was holding its breath. I remembered sitting in the backseat of Dad's car as a kid, watching the cliffs blur past while Sabrina sang along to pop songs in the front seat. I remembered how he used to turn the volume down when I asked a question, how I had to repeat myself twice before he even looked at me. Some things had started early. At the hotel, I laid the documents out on the desk like I was preparing for war. I read every page twice. The language was clear. The property known as 612 Pacific Vista Lane is not to be sold, transferred, or mortgaged without the written and notarized consent of both Madeline Elise Grant and Sabrina Rose Grant. It was dated the 2nd of June 2015, signed by my grandmother and witnessed by two parties. Notarized, sealed, legitimate. I pulled out my laptop and searched the county's property records again. The current deed had been transferred to a holding trust 3 months ago under my parents' names. No mention of Sabrina or me. No sign that any dual consent had been requested or filed. They had gone around it. Around me, around the truth. I couldn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling for hours, rehearsing conversations I knew I wouldn't have the courage to start. What would I say to my father, to Denise, to Sabrina, who probably thought she had pulled off something brilliant? The next morning, I called the number on the business card. A receptionist with a calm voice told me Mr. Klein could see me at noon. I arrived 10 minutes early. The office was quiet and tastefully minimal, with framed photos of the California coastline and a long wall of legal books no one probably touched anymore. Douglas Klein was in his late 60s, tall with thinning gray hair and the kind of posture that made you feel like slouching was a sin. He welcomed me into a glass-walled office and offered coffee, which I declined. "Your grandmother said you might be in touch," he said, settling into his chair. "I understand there's some urgency." She gave me a copy of the will. "I believe my parents may have violated it." I explained everything. The listing. The transfer. The fact that I had never been contacted or asked for my consent. He listened without interruption, occasionally jotting notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he tapped his pen against the paper twice and then looked up. I reviewed the original will myself. "It's valid. Binding. And if what you're saying is accurate, the sale of the villa or any steps toward it constitutes a breach. Possibly fraud, depending on how they filed the paperwork." My throat tightened. "Can they undo it?" "That depends. If the sale has not been finalized, we can file a motion to pause proceedings. If it has been transferred already, we may need to pursue civil remedies. Either way, you have rights here. And leverage." The word leverage clanged against something inside me. I wasn't used to having it. Not in this family. "What do I need to do?" He handed me a small stack of forms and explained the process. "We'd need to file a formal notice with the realtor, notify the county clerk, and potentially send a cease and desist letter to my parents." He offered to make the first contact if I wanted to keep some distance. I didn't answer right away. I was still wrapping my mind around the fact that I had power in this situation. That I wasn't just reacting but choosing. "Send the letter," I said finally. He nodded once, then stood. "You're doing the right thing, Miss Grant." As I walked out of the building, sunlight hit my face like a dare. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving the way they treated me. I was confronting it. Not out of revenge or bitterness. Out of a need for truth. For recognition. The villa was more than property. It was the last physical piece of a childhood they had spent years rewriting. And now that I had the proof, I wasn't going to let them erase me again. I called my father from the hotel parking lot, my thumb hovering over the screen for a full minute before I pressed it. Part of me hoped he wouldn't answer, that I'd get his voicemail and could pretend I tried. But on the fourth ring, he picked up. "Madeline," he said, like he hadn't just cut me out of a multi-million-dollar sale. "We need to talk." I said, already feeling the heat rise in my chest. "I just spoke to Grandma. She showed me the will. You had no right to sell the villa without my consent." There was a long pause, then a sigh. "I don't think you understand how these things work," he said. "Your mother and I have been the sole caretakers of that house for years. Taxes, maintenance, repairs. It's been our burden. You left. You don't live here, you don't contribute. This wasn't your decision to make. That house was part of Grandma's estate," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "And, according to the will, you had no legal right to sell it without both my and Sabrina's approval. It's just a technicality, Madeline. You're not involved in the family affairs anymore. You've built your life in New York. Why does this even matter to you?" I swallowed hard, gripping the steering wheel with my free hand. "Because you erased me. You didn't even tell me. You didn't ask. You just decided I didn't exist. We didn't think you'd care." His words landed like a slap. Simple, final, a verdict. I hung up without another word. Back in my hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the tears come, silent and hot. I had told myself I was over needing anything from them. That I had moved on, become my own person. But hearing my father confirm what I had always suspected, that I wasn't considered family anymore, was more painful than I expected. Once the anger settled into something clearer, I opened my laptop and searched for Caleb Owens. We hadn't spoken in over a decade, not since our college graduation in Berkeley. He had been one of the few people who really saw me back then, when I still thought being quiet and hardworking would earn respect. He was now a real estate attorney in San Francisco, specializing in estate law and probate. I found his work email and typed, "Hi Caleb, it's Madeline Grant. I know it's been a long time. I could use your help with something complicated. Do you have a few minutes this week?" He replied in under an hour. Hey Maddie, wow, it's been forever. I can definitely make time. Want to hop on a call tomorrow? We scheduled a Zoom meeting for the next afternoon. I spent the night reviewing the will again, highlighting the key sections, gathering the emails from my mom and the listing details from Bryce. I wanted to be prepared. If I was going to take a stand, I didn't want to fumble through it. When Caleb's face appeared on my screen, I felt an unexpected rush of comfort. He hadn't changed much. Still had that easy smile and the calm presence that once made study groups bearable. Hey stranger, he said. So, what kind of legal mess did you fall into? I gave him the short version, then emailed him the documents. His smile faded as he clicked through the files. Well, he said, finally leaning back in his chair, you're not wrong to be upset. This is a clear violation. The clause about joint consent is standard and it's airtight. If your parents sold or transferred ownership without your signature, they've potentially committed probate fraud. At the very least, the transaction is legally challengeable. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and dread. So, what are my options? First, we file an official notice of dispute with the county clerk. That'll put a temporary freeze on the title transfer if the sale hasn't closed yet. Second, we notify the listing agent and demand they pull the property off the market until the issue is resolved. Worst case scenario, if the sale already went through, we can file a lawsuit for damages and breach of fiduciary duty. Given the value of the property, that could be significant. What about criminal charges? He hesitated. Probate fraud is tricky to prosecute unless you can prove intent. But the civil case alone is strong. Especially if your grandmother is willing to provide a statement. She is. Then they're in trouble. I stared at the screen, unsure whether I felt vindicated or exhausted. What would you do if you were me? He tilted his head, thoughtful. I'd ask myself what matters more, making them pay or making sure you're never treated like this again. But either way, you're not wrong to push back. You were written out of something that belongs to you. That's not just unfair, it's illegal. I nodded slowly. Okay, let's do it. I'll get the paperwork started tonight, he said. Just sit tight. You've got a right to be angry, Maddie. And now you've got something they can't ignore. After the call ended, I closed my laptop and walked over to the window. The sun was setting over the Monterey Bay, casting that familiar orange glow over the water. Somewhere just a few miles down the coast, my family was carrying on like nothing had happened. But they were wrong about me. I wasn't gone. I wasn't forgotten. Not anymore. The last time I stepped foot in the villa was the summer of 2016. I was 29, just a few months into my new promotion at the agency. I had flown in for a long weekend, more out of obligation than desire. Grandma had asked me to visit. She said the hydrangeas were in full bloom and she missed seeing someone who remembered when the house still smelled like her cooking instead of cleaning products. When I arrived, the driveway was already crowded. Sabrina was hosting some kind of welcome dinner for her new boyfriend, Jeremy Carlisle. From what I gathered through Mom's excited phone calls, Jeremy was the golden boy of the tech scene, fresh off some startup exit in Palo Alto. Of course, he was tall, broad-shouldered with a toothbrush commercial smile. I walked into the house and saw him laughing in the kitchen with my parents like he'd been part of the family for years. Sabrina saw me walk in and offered a brief wave. Not a hug. Not a hi. Just a flick of the wrist before turning back to stir something in a pot while Jeremy kissed her temple. My mom came over, kissed my cheek, and said she was so glad I could make it. She asked about my flight, then immediately launched into a story about how Sabrina and Jeremy had just toured vineyards in Sonoma. Dad didn't even look up from setting the table. I sat through dinner that night like a guest at someone else's party. Every question, every compliment, every ounce of attention flowed toward Sabrina. She had a new partnership with a skincare brand. Jeremy had just bought a cabin in Tahoe. They might move in together. My parents practically glowed with pride. I tried to speak once. I mentioned a campaign I had led that made headlines in the Wall Street Journal. Mom nodded but didn't ask for details. Dad changed the subject to how Sabrina's follower count had jumped after one video she posted about summer outfits. I smiled, kept eating, and let the silence bloom between bites. Later that evening, I stepped outside onto the back deck needing air. The sky was still streaked with pink, the ocean, a quiet murmur below. I leaned against the railing wondering what exactly I had thought I'd find by coming back. A minute later Sabrina joined me barefoot and carrying 2 glasses of wine. "Thought you might need one," she said, holding it out. "Thanks," I said, taking it but not sipping. She stared out over the waves. "They really like him, huh?" "They love him," I said. They barely looked at me. She shrugged, sipping her wine. "You don't make it easy, you know. You're always so distant. I mean, you live across the country. I come when I'm invited. This is the first time in years anyone's asked me to show up." She raised her eyebrows. "Grandma asked you, didn't she?" "Exactly," I said, turning toward her. "Grandma asked me. Not Mom. Not Dad. You think I enjoy walking into a house where I feel like a forgotten photograph?" She tilted her head, amused. "Madeline, you always take everything so personally. It's not my fault they like having me around." I gripped the railing harder. "Do you even realize how privileged you are? Everything handed to you. Every door opened before you knock. They rearranged their lives around your whims and gave me rules. You don't see that." She smirked, that same little curl of the lips she used when she got away with something as a child. "Maybe they just love me more." Her voice was light, but it landed like a blow. I turned away, not trusting myself to speak. After a moment, she added, softer but with no less edge. "It's not my fault if I'm easier to love." I stared out at the ocean, the salt air suddenly sharp in my throat. I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself to. A lifetime of swallowing words sat behind my teeth like broken glass. The next morning I packed before sunrise. I left no note. No goodbye. I slipped out while the house slept quiet as a ghost. That was the last time I saw any of them in person. The years that followed hardened the memory like amber. I buried it under work, under routines, under layers of self-sufficiency. But I never truly forgot the way she looked at me that night, like my hurt was a joke she had already won. Now standing in a Monterey law office with documents that proved they had stolen something real from me, I understood why that memory had never fully let go. They hadn't just pushed me out of their lives. They had convinced themselves I was never part of it. Caleb moved fast. Within 48 hours, he had drafted and sent a formal notice of legal dispute to the listing agent, escrow manager, and the Monterey County Recorder's Office. The letter cited breach of testamentary clause, lack of proper consent, and the risk of fraudulent conveyance. He also requested a temporary hold on any pending transactions until the matter could be resolved. It was the kind of language that made realtors sweat and buyers back off. By Thursday morning, the listing was pulled offline. No explanation, no press release. Just gone. But in a small coastal town like Carmel by the Sea, silence travels fast. I knew it wouldn't be long before word got back to my parents. The villa wasn't just a home, it was their favorite trophy. The place they showed off to guests, the backdrop of countless photos Sabrina had posted online with captions like "family first" or "grateful for this life." To have it yanked from the market by a legal dispute wasn't just inconvenient, it was embarrassing. The first email from my mother came less than a day later. Subject: "Can we talk?" She wrote as if nothing had happened. "Madeline, I heard from the realtor that there's been some confusion regarding the sale of the house. I think we should clear things up. Let's not make this into something bigger than it needs to be. Love, Mom." I didn't reply. The second email came that evening. Subject: "Please read." She was more direct this time. Said she understood I had spoken with Grandma. Said maybe she hadn't communicated things clearly, but that this wasn't the way to resolve family misunderstandings. She asked if I would consider meeting her and Dad for lunch. I clicked mark as unread and shut my laptop. By Friday morning, the third email was laced with guilt. "Madeline, you have no idea what this is doing to Sabrina. She's been under enormous stress. She thought everything was settled. I wish you could find it in your heart to be more compassionate. This isn't about legalities. It's about family. You're hurting us more than you know." That part made me laugh out loud. I let them all pile up in my inbox without replying. My silence was deliberate. After a lifetime of being dismissed and overlooked, this time I wanted them to sit in their own discomfort. And that's when the unexpected message came. It was a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. The voice was low, hesitant, but unmistakable. "Hey Maddie, it's Jeremy. Jeremy Carlisle. I know this might be weird, but can we talk?" I hadn't heard that voice since the summer of 2016. I almost deleted the message without listening. But something made me pause. Maybe it was the way he said my name. Or maybe I just wanted to know what kind of role he was playing now. I called him back later that evening. He picked up on the first ring. "Madeline. Thanks for calling. What do you want?" "I'm not trying to stir things up," he said quickly. I think you deserve to hear this from me." He paused, then continued. "I broke up with Sabrina 2 weeks ago. I moved out. It's done." "Why are you telling me?" "Because I found out about the will. And the villa. And everything she's been lying about. She told me you were out of the picture, that you'd abandoned the family, that she inherited everything. But now seeing what's happening, I realize I was lied to just like you were. You believed her." I did. At first, she was so sure of herself. The way she spoke about it, it didn't even occur to me to question it. She said the house was legally hers, that your grandmother had cut you out, that you were unstable, bitter. I didn't know any better. And now I know. I spent 4 years with someone who has no idea what honesty means. Everything was for show, for the feed, for the illusion of being adored. She used me to build her brand. I thought we were building a life together, but I was just part of the props. There was a long pause on the line. "I'm not looking for sympathy, Maddie. I just thought you deserved to know you weren't the only one they tried to erase." She made me think I was her partner, but I was just another tool. I sat down slowly on the edge of my hotel bed, staring at the faint light blinking from my muted television. "Did she know the will said both of us had to sign?" "She did. I saw the document. She said it was outdated. That your grandmother would never contest it. That you were irrelevant now." I didn't question it. I should have. I exhaled, steadying the knot forming in my throat. "Thank you for telling me. I wish I had figured it out sooner," he said. "Before I let her use my name, my contacts, my friends. She burned every bridge. And she's about to learn that people remember who lies." He didn't say goodbye, he just hung up. I sat there letting the weight of his words settle in my bones. Sabrina hadn't just lied to me, she had lied to everyone. And for years no one questioned her because she looked like the girl who deserved everything. Now all of it was unraveling. Not because I had screamed or begged for justice, but because I had finally decided to stop playing along. And I wasn't done yet. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't have checked her page. But now, knowing what I knew and what Caleb had already set in motion, I typed her name into the search bar and pressed enter. Her account was still public, still branded in soft tones and ocean light. Still filled with curated images of perfection. Aerial shots of brunch tables. Videos of her walking barefoot on the villa's stone patio, wind catching her silk robe. Captions like "Home is where you feel loved" and "Gratitude first, always." But the comments were new. They had started flooding in 3 days ago. First a trickle, then a wave. I scrolled through them slowly. "Is it true you stole the house from your sister? Wow. All that sunshine can't hide a rotten core. You should be ashamed." Unfollowed. Brand partnerships dropped like dominoes. One cosmetics company quietly archived every post she'd tagged them in. A boutique skincare brand issued a statement saying they had no ongoing collaborations with Sabrina Grant. Her most recent paid post had hundreds of replies calling her a liar. The cracks were visible. Not just in the comments but in the images themselves. She had stopped posting for 3 days. Then came a story, just text on a pastel background. "Sometimes life throws things at you that you don't deserve. I'm doing my best. Please be kind." I almost laughed. She was doing her best now that her world was crumbling. But she hadn't spared a thought for me when she was up there high above consequence. Now she wanted kindness. The story vanished after 24 hours, but the damage remained. You can scrub captions, you can delete comments, But screenshots live forever. Aunt Lorraine emailed me on a Thursday afternoon. Subject: I owe you an apology. She didn't waste time with formalities. Madeline, I'm sorry. I believed what your parents told me. I thought you'd abandoned the family, that you didn't care. I never questioned it. That was my failure. I see it now. And I'm sorry I helped them hurt you even by staying quiet. I didn't respond. Other emails followed. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Old family friends who used to call me the serious one. Some messages were defensive, others felt like awkward attempts at reconciliation. Most of them said the same thing in different ways. We didn't know, we believed them. We see it differently now. But the truth was, I didn't need them to see it. What I wanted couldn't be typed in an email or fixed with a comment. I didn't want sympathy, I wanted acknowledgement. Not performative regret, but quiet truth. And I wanted them to sit in the same silence they had given me all those years. A local blog picked up the story next. Then a lifestyle columnist in San Jose wrote a longer piece. It wasn't investigative journalism, just enough of a summary to stir curiosity. A beachside inheritance battle in Carmel by the Sea. 2 sisters, one trust, one disputed will. I got 3 interview requests in 24 hours. One from a podcast, another from a regional magazine, and one from a tabloid that had once run a puff piece on Sabrina's California coastal aesthetic. I declined them all. This wasn't a media opportunity. This was my life. My loss. My inheritance. My name. I wasn't interested in letting strangers define my story. For once I had the power to write it myself. And the next chapter didn't need a spotlight. It needed peace. Still, I checked the headlines. I watched Sabrina's digital world unravel the way she had constructed it so carefully. I saw the light dim behind her eyes in new photos. I noticed how the sponsored posts slowed then stopped, how her likes dropped, how her followers thinned. It wasn't revenge. Not exactly. It was accountability. Grandma called me one evening just after sunset. I heard from Lorraine, she said. Sounds like she finally pulled her head out of the sand. I smiled faintly. People are trying to backpedal now. Acting like they never chose sides. They always choose sides, Maddie. Most just pretend neutrality afterward. She asked how I was holding up. I told her the truth. I'm okay. Better than I thought I'd be. Good. Because you're the one who told the truth, and you didn't need to shout to be heard. I hung up with tears in my eyes. Not from sadness, from something deeper. A kind of release I hadn't felt in years. I hadn't lost anything. They had. They lost the chance to do the right thing. To admit they were wrong before it was too late. And now the world was finally seeing what I had known all along. Beneath the glow, beneath the perfect light, Sabrina's kingdom was made of mirrors. And now one by one they were cracking. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. It was thick cream-colored with my name written in my father's handwriting across the front in his deliberate blocky print. I stared at it for a long time before opening it, turning it over in my hands like it might dissolve. Part of me thought about tossing it unopened into the hotel trash can. Another part wanted to know how he'd try to justify everything now that the walls were falling in. Inside was a folded sheet of stationery with the family crest embossed in the corner. I didn't even know we had a family crest. Madeline, it began. I'll get straight to the point. The current legal situation is hurting all of us. If you're willing to withdraw the claim, we are prepared to negotiate a revised agreement, one that includes a fair distribution and recognizes your role. Let's not drag this through the courts. No one wins in that scenario. Your father, Thomas Grant, no apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Just an offer tied neatly in the language of compromise. But the truth was, the only reason he wanted to negotiate now was because I had leverage. And that leverage wasn't going away. I set the letter down and turned to my phone. A new text message lit up the screen. It was from my mother. Sabrina's not eating. She barely leaves her room. You've made your point. Is this what you wanted, to see your family fall apart? I didn't respond. There was nothing to say to people who only reached for kindness when they were cornered. Nothing to say to people who only saw me when I threatened what they cared about. That night I drove to Grandma's house. She was waiting for me with 2 mugs of peppermint tea and that calm look she always wore when the world got noisy. They wrote to you, didn't they? Yes. Are you surprised? Not really. She studied me for a moment. You have every right to do what you're doing, Maddie. They crossed a line. You didn't. But let me ask you something. I nodded. What do you want this to mean when it's all over? I hesitated. No one had asked me that. Not even myself. What did I want this to become besides justice? I don't know. That's fair. But think about it. You've already exposed the lie. You've already protected the truth. Now you have to decide if this ends with revenge or something better. She reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. Don't let emotion make your decision. Let principle do that. Use your power wisely. That's how we make peace with ourselves later. The words sat with me long after I drove back to the hotel. I stared at the ceiling most of the night, replaying everything. My father's arrogance, my mother's guilt, Sabrina's deception, the villa, the silence, the years of pretending nothing was wrong, of swallowing every slight, every dismissal, and now a letter offering money to forget. By morning I knew what I had to do. I called Caleb. He picked up immediately. I was wondering when you'd call, he said. They reached out. I figured. They must be scrambling by now. They're offering a revised split if I drop the dispute. He paused. How do you want to handle it? I want them to admit what they did. In writing. Not just to me, but legally. I want a formal acknowledgement of the will. I want the deed reinstated. If they want to talk percentages, they can do it after they undo the fraud. You're asking for full reversal before negotiation. Exactly. No middle ground. No handshakes. They can't pretend this was a misunderstanding. They knew what they were doing. They were hoping I wouldn't find out. Caleb's voice was calm, but I could hear the edge of satisfaction. You're thinking clearly. That makes our job easier. I also want a clause in writing, I added. They're never to list or sell that house again without full written consent from both me and Grandma. And I want it notarized. I can draft that today, he said. If they're serious, we'll know soon enough. If not, we'll proceed to formal litigation. Let them choose, I said. Let them decide how much truth they're willing to admit in public. We ended the call and I stood by the window overlooking the quiet parking lot. The morning fog was lifting, revealing soft sunlight on the distant water. The villa sat just beyond those cliffs, invisible from where I stood, but suddenly clearer than ever in my mind. This wasn't about winning. It was about remembering who I was before they tried to erase me. And taking her back, one line, one clause, one truth at a time. The morning started with coffee and silence, the kind of quiet you don't question because it feels earned. I was still in my robe when the email landed in my inbox. It came from Douglas Klein's office, marked urgent and addressed to both my legal team and the Grant family representatives. I opened the file and read every word twice. The tone was unmistakable. Clear, sharp, unapologetic. Douglas had laid it out with surgical precision. The letter declared that the attempted sale of the villa had violated the terms of a still active will. That Sabrina's signed consent was not sufficient. That the forged or absent documentation regarding my agreement amounted to a breach of probate law. And most damning of all, that the property transfer had been initiated in bad faith by the parties who knew the legal risks but proceeded anyway. If corrective action was not taken within 10 business days, formal litigation would commence. The letter outlined the financial, reputational, and potentially criminal implications with calm, devastating finality. I read it again and felt my heart settle into something still. Something grounded. I didn't need to win. I just needed them to know I wasn't bluffing. I set my laptop aside and stood by the window, watching a line of fog lift off the Monterey coastline. It was all so different from the way this began. I had come here feeling like an outsider. Like I was grasping at something long gone. But now, with each document, each clause, each call to accountability, I felt myself returning to the center of the story they tried to erase me from. My phone buzzed with a video call request. I didn't recognize the number, but I had a feeling. I hesitated, then answered. Sabrina's face filled the screen. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her hair was tied up messily and she looked exhausted. Puffy eyes. A slight tremble in her bottom lip. She didn't speak at first. Just looked at me like she wasn't sure if I was real. Finally, she said quietly, "I got the letter." I nodded, saying nothing. "We didn't think it would go this far. You didn't think I'd fight back." She swallowed hard. Her eyes were glossy and she blinked quickly like she was trying to stop a dam from bursting. "I didn't think you'd care about the villa that much." "That's where you were wrong." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry, Maddie. I really am. I thought you didn't want anything to do with us anymore. You never came home. You never asked about the house. Because I knew I wasn't welcome." She looked down. "I was stupid. I was selfish. I let Mom and Dad convince me that this was fine, that it was already mine. Was that enough for you, number? Not anymore." I leaned forward slightly, my voice low but steady. "This was never about the house, Sabrina." She looked confused. "Then what?" "It was about what the house represented. A place I belonged. A place we all did. Until you decided I didn't count anymore. You didn't just take property. You erased me. You made me invisible in my own family. I never wanted that," she whispered. "But you never stopped it either." Her eyes filled and overflowed. I saw her wipe her face with her sleeve small and fragile on the screen. "Do you remember the summer of 2016? She nodded. "You brought Jeremy. You paraded him around like a prince. Everyone catered to you and no one asked how I was doing. I was there and somehow completely not." "I didn't know what to say then," she admitted. "You still don't," I said. "But I'm trying." Trying doesn't fix what's already broken. It only matters if it leads to something real. "Are you ready for that?" She nodded. Slowly. I could see the weight settling. "We'll sign whatever we have to. We'll undo the transfer. I'll talk to Mom and Dad. You shouldn't have to convince them. They should have done that years ago." "I know." There was a pause, long and thick. "You hate me now, don't you?" I exhaled. "Number, I don't hate you. But I don't trust you either." "That hurts. It should." She nodded again. "What happens next? Caleb will send over the new documents. If your team signs them and files the correction, we won't proceed with the lawsuit. But there will be no private side deals. No rewriting history." "Okay. And I want a formal letter of acknowledgement. One that states I was always a rightful heir. That the previous transaction excluded me illegally." "That's fair." The silence grew heavier. "Do you think we'll ever be okay again?" I stared at her. Really looked. "Maybe. But not now." She nodded, wiped her face again, and ended the call without another word. I sat there for a long while, phone still in my hand, feeling the strange hush after a storm. It wasn't closure. Not yet. But it was the first honest moment we'd had in years. And maybe that was enough for now. The villa had already been stripped down to empty walls and silent corners when the legal dust began to settle. No more velvet throws, no driftwood sculptures, no lingering scent of rosemary from the kitchen. Just echoing rooms and distant seagulls outside windows that no longer framed memories. But I wasn't going to stand in that place again. Not literally. That part was done. The question now was what I wanted to do with what I had earned, not in money but in moral ground. Caleb and I met one final time across a quiet table at a coffee shop tucked into a corner of Pacific Grove. He had a folder in front of him, the kind you don't bring unless everything's been signed, sealed, and dusted off. "It's over," he said, simply sliding the papers toward me. No further contact from their attorneys. They signed and filed the transfer reversal and the deed addendum. "You're reinstated as legal co-heir. And the sale cancelled, permanently. The buyers pulled out, the escrow account was closed. The house is back under your family's name, jointly held between you and Sabrina." I looked at him over the rim of my cup. "And you believe them?" He gave a tired smile. "Number. But I believe their fear outweighed their pride. For now." I nodded. That's when I placed a thin envelope on the table and slid it toward him. He opened it slowly, reading my handwritten note. "You want to set up a charitable trust?" "Yes. In Grandma's name. All the funds from the cancelled sale. Every last dollar." He looked at me unsure. You're walking away from over 2 million. Number. I'm repurposing it. He leaned back. And the trust, what would it do? Help women. Specifically women who were pushed out of their homes, denied inheritance, gaslit by their own families into thinking they didn't deserve what was theirs. Legal support. Transitional housing grants. Tuition coverage. Real help. His face changed then. Not with surprise, but something closer to respect. And you don't want your name on it, I shook my head. Just Grandma's. She saw me. Believed me. Protected me. That's enough legacy for both of us. He folded the note and tucked it back in the envelope. I'll call a nonprofit I know in Oakland. They already work with domestic cases. We'll make it happen. Thank you, I said quietly. It took 10 days to finalize the setup. In that time, I received no phone calls, no emails, no acknowledgements from anyone in the family. It was as if I had simply disappeared again. Only this time, I wasn't erased, I had chosen to step back. Then one morning, while scrolling through a friend's Facebook post about Monterey art festivals, I saw it. A link to a small local news outlet with the headline, Grant Family Donates Proceeds from Villa Sale to Community Fund. The article was short and vague. No mention of lawsuits, no mention of me. It credited the family with establishing a women's assistance fund in honor of a beloved family matriarch, but said the gesture had been made quietly without fanfare. There were quotes from the nonprofit's director about how timely and impactful the funding was. There were no photographs. Just a picture of the villa empty, its white walls glowing against the sea air. I read the article twice. I clicked the link 3 more times that day. And each time it settled more deeply in me. I wasn't mentioned. Not once, but I knew. I knew where the money came from. I knew whose fight carved space for it to exist. I knew who had carried the weight when no one else would. And I also knew this legacy didn't need credit, it needed action. A week later, Grandma and I sat on her porch with lemon tea watching the sun melt into the water. I saw the article, she said, folding the printout she'd brought with her. I nodded. They're taking credit. Let them. She turned to me, her eyes fierce but calm. That fund will help people, Madeline. Women who've been told their stories don't matter. That's more powerful than a name and a byline. It's enough for me. It should be. We sat in silence for a long while. There was a peace in the air I hadn't felt in years. Not because the world had made itself fair, but because I had chosen something better than resentment. I had chosen to leave the past as it was, flawed, painful, real, and build something that moved forward. I stood up as the wind picked up, brushing a strand of hair from my face. I never got an apology, I said. You never needed one, Grandma replied. And I realized she was right. Some things you don't need to hear to know they're true, and some victories never show up in headlines. But they stay with you in every quiet decision you made when no one believed you would. The sky over Carmel by the sea was a soft, overcast gray. The kind of sky that didn't demand your attention but made you feel like it understood. I pulled my coat tighter around me as I stepped out of the car, the gravel beneath my boots crunching like old memories. The villa sat just a few yards ahead, tucked behind a whitewashed fence and a line of blooming rosemary. It looked the same and yet completely different. The colors were warmer, the shutters a pale sage green now. A new brass number plate had replaced the one I remembered tracing with my fingers every summer when I was little. There was a wind chime hanging from the porch that hadn't been there before. The sound was delicate, unassuming. Someone else lived here now. I didn't walk through the gate. I didn't need to. I just stood at the edge of the path where the sidewalk met the driveway. That was close enough. My breath fogged in the morning air as I looked at the place that had once been filled with so much of me and later none of me at all. This had been a home, then a wound, then a weapon. Now it was simply a house with a view of the sea. There were no ghosts here. Only echoes I had already made peace with. I remembered the sound of Grandma's voice drifting from the kitchen. The clatter of her silver bangles against the sink. I remembered how she always said love didn't have to be loud to be real. And I remembered the last summer I spent here, the way it ended in silence and unspoken things. But none of that felt sharp anymore. It had all dulled into something I could carry without pain. I took out my phone and opened my notes app, but I couldn't find the words. So I switched to email and started typing. To me, subject release, forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about cutting yourself free from the rope they tied you to. I forgive them not because they asked, not because they deserve it, but because I deserve to stop carrying what they refused to take responsibility for. I paused, then added, "This house was never the inheritance. Peace is." I hit send. No one walked out of the house. No one knew I was there. That made it easier. I turned away from the gate and walked down toward the overlook, the waves below rolling in soft and slow like the coast was trying to remind me how time moves whether we heal or not. My car waited a few blocks away, and I didn't rush. I passed the small bookstore where Grandma once took me to pick out my first novel. It was still there, still painted the same robin's egg blue. The cafe next door had changed owners, but the smell of cinnamon and fresh bread drifted from the open window. It was strange how everything and nothing could change at once. When I got back to my car, I sat there for a moment with the engine off, just listening to the rhythm of my own breathing. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. Not for leaving, not for fighting back, not for choosing a future without them in it. I looked up through the windshield back at the villa one last time. But I didn't feel the need to hold onto it. I started the engine and pulled away slowly, my hands steady on the wheel. I didn't check the rearview mirror. There are moments in life when you don't get closure from others. You give it to yourself. And that's what this was. Not a reunion, not a reconciliation. Just the soft, certain end to a chapter that had defined too many years of my life. As I merged onto the highway, the fog began to lift slightly, parting enough to let sunlight reach the edges of the windshield. It felt like a small, quiet kind of freedom. One I had earned, and maybe this is what healing looks like. Not perfection. Not answers. Just knowing you stood your ground, told the truth, and walked away standing taller than when you arrived. If you've ever been the one left out, if you've ever been erased by your own blood, if you've ever looked around a room full of people who were supposed to love you and felt invisible, then I want you to hear this. You are not alone. You matter. Your voice is not too quiet, your pain is not too inconvenient, and your story deserves to be told. If any part of mine reminded you of your own, I hope you'll share it. Because sometimes healing begins with knowing someone else understands.